My name is Michael Rockmus. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Coordinator for U.S. Green Building Council California. And welcome today to our webinar on the future of Energy Star Portfolio Manager. U.S. Green Building Council California is an independent, membership-based nonprofit with the mission of transforming California through the built environment into a more sustainable, resilient, and equitable place for all. We do this by leading, educating, connecting, and advocating. And I welcome everyone to visit our website, usgbc-ca.org, to check out our event and training calendar, our career resources, and our green building guides. You can also learn about all the membership options that we have. Today, we are blessed to be joined by two people who've been tracking the threats to Energy Star closely, and I'm sure you've all heard something about that. And the reason you're here is because you care about Energy Star. So we have today Cliff Majersik, who works at the Institute for Market Transformation, IMT, as a senior advisor. Cliff and IMT have been trailblazers in developing building performance standards and have been tracking Energy Star and Energy Star Portfolio Manager very closely. We're also joined by Ben Evans, who's the Federal Legislative Director at the U.S. Green Building Council, our national USGBC, helping lead the council's advocacy work in Washington, promoting green buildings and sustainable communities. And they've also been doing a lot of advocacy to support Energy Star. We are going to be recording this presentation. We may cut off the Q&A at the end, but we're going to have plenty of time for Q&A. So please think about what questions you have. The chat will be open. I'll be monitoring that. And we'll be sending out the recording and a PDF of the slides later. So thanks again for joining. I'm going to hand it over to Cliff.
Thank you very much, Michael, and thank you all for joining us. This is certainly top of mind for IMT, and I imagine top of mind for many of you. It's certainly top of mind for many of our partners in real estate and government and elsewhere. So I am going to try to share my slideshow. I just have a few slides, and some of them are fairly basic, and I think most of you will be familiar with it. But it provides helpful context, and we can share these slides for you all if you're communicating with your peers. It's important that we get out the message to dispel some misinformation and to build the broadest possible business constituency for keeping Portfolio Manager at EPA and keeping it as we know it and love it. To start off, as Michael referenced, there is talk about EPA, which has had Portfolio Manager since 1999 in its earlier incarnation, privatizing Portfolio Manager, privatizing all of Energy Star. Of course, Energy Star is not just about buildings, it's the products that we all know and love, it's homes and it's industry. And EPA Administrator Zeldin, the head of EPA, did not actually realize at the time that he testified before Congress on May 20th that Energy Star included buildings. He was thinking at the time it was only about the products, the blue and white label that we're all so familiar with. And he also didn't realize at the time that Energy Star is required by law, that there's a statutory obligation on DOE and EPA to maintain Energy Star. And so his testimony reflected the fact that he didn't realize there was a statutory requirement that EPA maintain Energy Star, and he thought they could just get rid of it without consulting Congress. That is not the case. In fact, Energy Star was created back in 1992 under President H.W. Bush. It's been bipartisan all along, up to today. Congress subsequently explicitly delegated responsibility for maintaining Energy Star to EPA and DOE. So they are statutorily required to do that. That requirement can only be repealed with an act of Congress, and there is no pending legislation to repeal that statutory requirement. It certainly was not part of the big reconciliation bill that was passed a couple weeks ago. So some basic facts that most of you are probably familiar with about Energy Star Portfolio Manager. Created again in 1999, providing an apples-to-apples comparison. More than 100,000 users of the platform. And last year alone, more than 330,000 buildings were benchmarked. Collectively, it's almost 25% of all the commercial floor space in the United States. So it's an enormously utilized tool, as I imagine all of you know, because you're probably on this call because you use it. And it's enormously cost effective. The EPA budget last year was only $32 million. And the total savings from all of EPA's work just in 1 year was $40 billion. And that's more than a 350x return on investment. So incredible return on investment. You know, everybody should love to get that kind of return on our investments. And it saves the average American household $450 per year in energy costs. So it's important that Congress and the White House and the EPA all hear about how valuable and valued Energy Star is to the market, to businesses in particular, because we know that they're going to be responsive to businesses. In the messaging, it's really important to focus on economics. That Energy Star is important for the growth of our economy, that it helps save energy, that it helps the US be more energy independent. It leads to, in the parlance of President Trump, energy dominance. It's saving consumers and businesses money every day. Lead with the kind of metrics that I just presented. It's not helpful to talk about Energy Star in the context of regulatory mandates, including benchmarking and transparency laws or building performance standards. The messenger is very important. It's important that they hear from businesses and from Republican elected officials. It's not helpful for them to hear from Democrats or from non-governmental organizations. You know, unfortunately, we're in a very polarized moment, and so the messenger is as important as the message. I will say a little bit more about, and this is maybe what some of you all are most interested in hearing, the immediate sort of outlook for Energy Star. So the Trump administration, including EPA, has said that they want to privatize Energy Star to end it by the end of this fiscal year, which ends September 30th. And but they said those things back when they didn't realize that Energy Star was statutorily mandated, and they didn't realize that it actually included buildings and other aspects beyond products. Now, they have gone forward with plans to reorganize EPA and slash jobs and budget, and they intend to eliminate the division that includes Energy Star. But their most recent reorganization doesn't speak directly to Energy Star. And our intelligence is that they are actively considering all their options. I think that they are reconsidering some of their earlier statements about ending or privatizing. They are hearing from industry, and that's making a real difference. Industry has been the messenger that has told them that you know, it's statutorily required and it's very much valued by business. Groups like the Real Estate Roundtable have been very much in the lead, but also very powerful Republican-aligned organizations like the National Association of Realtors and the National Association of Home Builders have also delivered the message that they want to keep Energy Star at EPA. And we think that is making a real difference. So it's possible that Energy Star goes away on September 30th, but we think that's relatively unlikely. We think they're going to take their time, especially if they hear from more and more business voices calling on them to keep it. The Energy Star Portfolio Manager tool is actually a platform that is hosted by GDIT, and Energy Star recently exercised a 1-year contract to renew the hosting of Energy Star Portfolio Manager. So they've just committed to the contractor to keep it up through June of next year. And this is what they do every year. They exercise another year on this long-term contract. So that's a good sign. It's not dispositive. It doesn't say absolutely that it will stay up that long, but it is a good indication that it is likely to stay up that long. We are working directly with local and state governments to plan for every contingency. We don't think that those will be necessary. We're hopeful that it will stay at EPA. There is a possibility it could get moved to DOE. That would be the sort of least disruptive contingency. But it is so important. LEED is built on, LEED for existing buildings is built on Energy Star. Investors, tenants are looking for these Energy Star scores, GRESB, everything else, and including benchmarking and transparency laws and building performance standards. And of course, California is working on a statewide building performance standard. All of this rests on Energy Star. So it is too important to let anything bad happen to it. And it is too important not to plan for all the worst cases. And I'm not going to get into all the contingency planning now, but rest assured that there are contingency plans happening in the background, and that one of the key messages we've convened government and real estate and others is that we need to speak with a united voice. If the worst were to happen, we need to stick together and make sure that there is one platform, Energy Star, that is continuing and serving everyone as a single source of truth. So I'm going to hand it off to Ben Evans, who will talk a little bit more about the politics and messaging and appropriations. Both Ben and I are here in Washington, D.C. I'll stop sharing my screen and let you see Ben in full glory.
Thanks, Cliff. And thanks, Michael and USGBC California for having me. I know this subject has a ton of interest because we did actually get some late breaking, very positive and surprising news yesterday on Energy Star appropriations, and I'll get to that. But I've never had more interaction on my LinkedIn on a LinkedIn post than the post that I put up about that yesterday. There's just obviously a ton of interest in this issue because I think Energy Star, as Cliff said, has tentacles across the economy and in so many different sectors of the economy. And I think that's also really its strength is that there are so many stakeholders and clearly stakeholders that are being vocal. I think, just to add a little bit to the state of play of what Cliff said, the White House budget, the EPA budget proposal under this administration does zero out Energy Star for the FY26 fiscal year, which starts October 1. That's a budget proposal that goes to Congress, and Congress passes spending bills. So that's sort of where we are. The budget actually eliminates the entire Office of Atmospheric Protection, which is where the Energy Star and other climate programs live. So that is, they have made that their intent, and Cliff showed you what Secretary or Administrator Zeldin has said. I think obviously they're getting more information now from their general counsel and from outside stakeholders, and are evaluating their options, and they are, what we understand is, looking at a menu of options that include privatizing, maybe breaking it up and shifting some to DOE and keeping some at EPA. And other things. I think they're looking at all sorts of different things, and I think perhaps the best option is that I don't think we can hope for big plus ups in funding for Energy Star over the next few years, regardless of what happens, or new bells and whistles being added to Energy Star. They were working on a lot of things under the Biden administration that I think have sort of ground to a halt. But I think it is possible that we could end up with sort of status quo, and I think that perhaps is the best option that there is, and is I think somewhat realistic given where we are with Congress. And we have lost a lot of staff from Energy Star. A lot of the career staff have either taken the buyouts or left, and that's unfortunate. But there still are a lot of people there who have been there for decades, and have worked on Energy Star. So there still is a good bit of institutional knowledge in the program, both in portfolio manager and the other aspects of the program. I think, back to Congress, I mean, that is really where we have the leverage to Cliff's points about messaging and, business voices speaking out. I think business voices certainly have some reach with the administration and with the EPA. but really where our community has the most leverage is on Capitol Hill. The administration has sort of made clear what they'd like to do. And I think there is very clearly a lot of concern about that in Congress and among members of Congress, among Republicans in Congress. And we're fortunate that we have on the Senate side, we have two real energy efficiency champions on the Republican side who lead the Appropriations Committee. Susan Collins, Senator from Maine, heads the full committee, and Lisa Murkowski from Alaska heads the subcommittee that governs these things. And so they have both been big supporters. And I think Cliff showed the quote from Susan Collins, who, as head of the Appropriations Committee, has a lot of say in this. And yet what happened yesterday, which was surprising, is, we've been working both the House and Senate and trying to get information out there. And we do have, I'll put a link to the chat. We still have an alert that's up that gets folks to, can direct folks to send messages to their members of Congress. We've had more than 1,600 people send message to their members of Congress through that. And if you think about each person has 2 senators and 1 House rep, that's more than 5,000 communications going to Congress on this issue, mostly emails, but some phone calls as well. And of course, it's not just our community, it is, all the other business groups, the electronics and appliance makers and HRI, the HVAC folks, home builders, real estate folks that Cliff mentioned. There are, just a lot of sectors that are doing this kind of advocacy. And what we saw yesterday was that it's working. So yesterday, the House Appropriations Committee passed the spending bill that covers EPA. And in that bill, they included a manager's amendment at the last minute there was a bipartisan manager's amendment that included language directing EPA to fully fund Energy Star at $32 million, which is basically flat funding from where we are now, the 32 million, and would be an excellent outcome, given all things considered. And to have the House pass that on a bipartisan basis, the Republican-controlled House is really a good sign that obviously there are a lot of things that Republicans on the Hill are not thrilled with that the administration is doing, or perhaps not comfortable with, but they are certainly picking their battles and where they will stand up and say no. This became an issue where they essentially yesterday, the Appropriations Committee stood up and said no, and directly opposed the administration's budget. And that is, I think somewhat remarkable, and is a testament to the advocacy that's going on around Energy Star. We are hopeful so that bill will now go to the full floor, but it's unlikely that there would be another amendment. It's sort of take it or leave it. It's unlikely that the bill is going to be. It is the Republican endorsed spending bill that includes terrible cuts to all sorts of other EPA programs and everything else. But that was one small win to get that language in there, and I think we're hoping to get the House is leaving today to go on recess. They'll be back in September, and we'll take up appropriations bills then, presumably, and hopefully we'll see that passed, and hopefully we will see the Senate bill very soon, and hopefully it includes very similar language to full funding, and I think that would be just a huge step. Just telling the administration, don't go here, don't go after Energy Star, and could influence what kinds of decisions they make in terms of next steps. I will put the link to that, or Cliff maybe already did. We also have been doing a lot of work on a lot of the, sort of explaining what happened with the budget reconciliation bill and some of the Inflation Reduction Act incentives and things. I'll put a couple of links of that in the chat as well, in case there's interest there. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Michael, and happy to answer questions.
One thing I'll add to what Ben said, in recent years, Congress has typically passed most appropriations through a continuing resolution rather than through regular appropriations. And that is again likely this year. But that doesn't take away from the fact that this is an incredibly strong message which has come from the House, and that a similar message coming from the Senate would go a long way towards keeping Energy Star funded. Energy Star does not normally have its own line item in the budget, which makes it a little bit harder to defend for Congress.
Thank you, Cliff. Thank you, Ben. So if anybody has any questions, feel free to raise your hand or put a note in the chat and let me know. I guess while folks are thinking about that, I will ask a question to Cliff. Ben mentioned kind of best case scenario probably is status quo. Do you think there's concerns that, it starts breaking and there's, it's not being maintained properly, even if it's funded and it technically exists, what's the risk of it being kind of run by people who don't like it?
Well, I mean, the good news, as Ben said, is that there are people who like it and who have dedicated their careers to it, who are still working at EPA and have no plans to leave. Now, the three most senior people that were a part of the Billings division and above them have taken early retirement. But as Ben said, there are a whole cadre of people with years, sometimes decades of experience running Energy Star for buildings who remain there and remain committed. So our hope is that they will be making as many of the decisions as possible. They have long operated with insufficient resources, even under Democratic administrations. So they're familiar with how to do that. That said, there is a heightened risk that things could go wrong. Even under presidents who were more committed to Energy Star and more committed to climate action, there have been periods where with prolonged outages of portfolio manager, the risk of that is higher than it would have been under other circumstances. But I mean, I should say it's probably higher, but one good news is if you don't touch it, if you're not trying to make improvements, it actually does sometimes they do have to take portfolio manager down to update it and that sort of thing. Those things are actually likely to be less common. There's going to be fewer updates to portfolio manager in the future. Certainly, the commercial energy consumption survey, CBEX, is the data that underlies portfolio manager. I hope that they'll finish out the update with the new CBEX, but the likelihood that they'll begin the next CBEX process is lower under this administration. Certainly, there were many enhancements that were planned and even underway. A lot of those enhancements, work has been discontinued and probably will, we're not going to see much in the way of enhancements, as Ben said, in the next few years. There's a chance that there's a big problem with portfolio manager, but I would say that the most likely scenario is that portfolio manager continues as it has in the past, which is to say that there's occasional outages. It's not maybe as reliable as something like Google, but it's mostly will be available, and most of the outages will be short.
Does anybody else have any questions?
There's a question in the chat from Dan at California Department of General Services. Does it appear that plenty of staff are still remaining to keep providing needed feedback and assistance? Yes. As of now, so the work is contracted, the actual portfolio manager platform is contracted to GDIT. They have, as I said, their contract has been extended. They've exercised an additional year with steady funding for it. The work of providing tech support, user support, is provided mostly by ICF. Indications are that their contract will be extended as well. That I think is still somewhat of an open question. And in the worst case, I could imagine that states or perhaps philanthropy might pick up some slack if there's a interruption in the provision of user support. I see John Amber has a question. Is there any movement to transition CBEX data to a different entity? Currently, CBEX data is collected by the Energy Information Administration, which is a sort of independent division with the Department of Energy. There's no movement to change that relationship. And in fact, that's a statutory requirement that they do that, although they've rarely met their goal of doing it once every 3 years. It's been 4 years or longer in between CBEX surveys, and I wouldn't be surprised if CBEX is delayed again.
And I would point out that the president's budget, unusually for that budget, requested full funding for the Energy Information Administration. So they have not tried to slash that budget. I don't exactly know why. I think maybe the secretary sees value in the data that they collect. I'm not, I don't know how much CBEX, they collect a lot of energy data. So CBEX and residential surveys and other things are just a part of that. But they did request full funding for that. So perhaps that is going to be an area that gets reasonably funded over the next year. And as Cliff mentioned, the bipartisan infrastructure law from a few years ago actually called for them to expand CBEX data along with a couple of other data sets and to improve the quality of it and all of that. But it was not funded. And they have not done any of that expansion. So hopefully one day we'll get there. We've been pushing to get more appropriations for that. For them to expand that so far without any luck.
There's also a question about the EPA's Green Power Partnership Program. Do you guys know anything about the status of that?
I don't.
I don't. I mean, there is a lot in flux right now. They just announced a big reorg of the agency and are going through how they're going to reorganize EPA, and EPA is going to take significant cuts, it looks like. So that's a tough one. I don't know how it's going to come out.
And just in terms of messaging, if you want something to be supported by the Trump administration, it's probably better that green not be in the name. The word green, you just call it clean energy or call it energy dominance or whatever you want to call it. But having green in the name could potentially put a target on something.
We know that all too well, Cliff.
Can you talk about any advice you would have for businesses now who are using Portfolio Manager and maybe are thinking like just planning in case something happens to it? Should they be, backing up their data or any other recommendations like that?
They should be backing up their data. The page that I provided does have a link to the Energy Star guidance on how to back up your data. So yeah, that precaution you absolutely should take. You should back up your data every time it's updated. Of course, your utilities in many cases are automatically updating your usage to Portfolio Manager. And so for that reason, even if you haven't made any changes, it's a good idea to back up the data so that you're capturing the most recent uploads from your utilities. And in the worst case, that backup would allow you to restore it, even if the platform had somehow changed.